Perfect. I'm glad I had that on there. As all of you know, you're certainly welcome to use the chat since you already have. You can use you can put your video on should you wish, or off. And just this gives you a little bit of a guideline. If you want to give a private message, there is a way to do that. We all use different tools, Teams, Zoom, but generally the same. I will introduce myself right off the bat. My name is Zoe. I'm a special education, a special assignment teacher, they call me, itinerant, for the gifted at HWDSB in Hamilton. I'm a consultant as well with with Advanced Learning Partnerships. And my specific role there is with Girls Who Game, which has really lifted me over the past year. An amazing group of individuals. I also am an instructor for Brock University. Specifically, my area of specialty there is junior education, and I do the junior ABQ courses there. And of course, I'm at ZB Pipe on Twitter. Little picture you see that I just added last minute was me visiting my son recently at his college or universities at U of T. And of course, what did we do right away was play games. One of my favorites, foosball. As we gather, I wanted everyone to take a moment to just acknowledge where you're coming from. You can certainly add that in the chat. If you want to use audio, you can do so in a moment. For me, I'm coming from Hamilton, situated on treaty land that is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. That history does not start at the point of European contact, as we know. It begins long before and includes the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Métis people, and continues to the present day. And as community members across Ontario, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live, work, as well as acknowledge the harms of the past and take actions with healing of the future. I love this poem that was up here. I don't know if there's anyone in the room who feels it speaks to you, or if you want to say it, if someone else wants to add their voice here, you're welcome to. If you want to volunteer, you just simply need to turn your audio on. I'm not going to read it, but it's something I do recommend you taking a look at. So for this hour, we are a learning community. And even, of course, if you're watching this from a recording, this is the part that you see where people are coming from. Or unfortunately, we don't always get to see that in that recording session, but here we can. So I'd love to just you to throw in the chat who you are, where you're from, what your role is in education, maybe why you're here. So what spoke to you? Why did you want to come to a session that focused on game-based learning and social emotional learning? What was it for you that spoke to you for this session, especially after a long day and week? Thanks, Dean. It's nice to see you, Sarah. Sarah, I'm sure you've come to these sessions already before. It was so nice to see your name here. And feel free, especially with the small group here online, to just pop in, or in terms of if you have anything to say or add. I've gained so much from you as well here. So So the session is brought to you by OECM in partnership with Dell Technologies and ALP Advanced Learning Partnerships. And just for your information, for those of you who don't know, OEMC is a nonprofit sourcing partner specifically for Ontario's education sector. Hopefully I get this right, Dean. And they contract out other partnerships, and it's like this one. So this one and all of these sessions were designed in consultation with Ontario educators And so there's many offerings, but it's specifically in pursuit of three ministry goals, which are achieving excellence, social emotional learning, equity, and inclusion. Did I get that right? Hopefully I did. I'm also proud to be a consultant with ALP, which is also a consultant firm that is part of this initiative. I would like to thank, as I always would, the wonderful community who freely share their resources all the time. I would not be doing this if it wasn't for all those people out there who are, constantly collaborating and sharing and encouraging people online, really lifting one another up. So I do believe we are better together, and don't know how I could have survived over the last couple of years without all of you. This is a three-part webinar series. Part one tonight is based on mostly on pedagogy and methods. It, really is just to tweak our own interest about the research and about play-based learning and social emotional learning. And then next week is part two, where we really will dive into some of the games. For example, you'll see many of them behind me right here. I will be diving into how I use those directly in the classroom, both offline and online. And then part three, we'll look at more role play kind of games, online games, especially looking at Minecraft. We'll talk a little bit about culturally responsive games. I'm very excited about part three as well. So tonight, frameworks, play-based education, why, what are the foundations, looking at three specific influencers that have had an impact on me and my thinking around play-based learning, game-based learning. I don't think we're going to have time to really get into specific games, but we will next week and the week after. I do have a link in which I will share with you in the chat that is specifically, you don't really need it now, but it will give you all of these slides, unless you want it. I guess I could share it in the chat here. You know what? I'm going to wait, I guess. I'm gonna. Oh, I see a few more people have arrived as well. It's really just notes for the entire session. So I didn't want you to feel like you had to take any notes, or all of that will be given to you at the end. Yeah. Unless you can actually tap onto this, I don't know if you can on Zoom. So the workshop is going to really review the growing body of evidence supporting that the idea that play is fundamental for children's positive development, an essential way to foster the skills required to thrive in today's world. So here we go. We see that the proposed benefits of play in the context of education usually fall into two categories. They fall into the developmental learning, like that's the social emotional self-regulation. And so that's one area of play and games. And then the other one, of course, is literacy, numeracy. It's sort of the more academic. I would say as a teacher myself, I definitely go between both of them, and you'll hear both of those being referenced quite a bit during this presentation, as well as next week. So when we talk about play, we all know, we all do it. It's pretty much something that every person, every culture, every place in the world does. It's very, with those ideas of play are very common for everybody, but we still have a tough time defining it. I'm wondering if anyone here wants to give it a shot. You're certainly welcome to use the audio if you want to, but does anyone here have a definition of how they would define play? And, and if you're thinking about that definition, oh, Katina, hello.
Hi there. For me, play is about having fun, being safe, but having a great time and just feeling happy. Yeah, that's probably my definition of play. And making it feel like it's not work.
Katina, you're going to love, I have a quote that's perfect for you that you're going to love that actually defines it in that way. And think about how many, I don't know how many parents are in the room, but how many times even those of us who love the idea of play, we've even said, come on, you have 5 more minutes, get off that game, stop playing, get to work, that kind of thing. So it's sometimes play is, we see it possibly as a distraction or not something that we should be doing, but instead we only do on our free time. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because it really is a dichotomy. The Ontario Ministry of Education recognizes that play is actually a vehicle for learning. In their document in 2016, Play-Based Learning in Kindergarten, that was the focus, the author noted that there's a link between play and learning for young children, especially in the area of problem solving, language, literacy, math, and so on. But we're going to talk about how it's not just that benefit for younger children. Many of us hear about that play-based learning pedagogy in kindergarten. In their statement on play-based learning, the Council of Ministers of Education, right, they noted there's a large amount of research and scientific evidence that recognizes play and games not only support learning for younger and older students and adults, but can also be more effective than traditional methods. And that's huge if we think about it. And again, I want you to kind of think about that dichotomy or that conflict that we as parents, as teachers, and so on, view about play and learning. The benefits of play are recognized by the scientific community, period. There's evidence about neural pathways in the children's brains, how they're influenced by and advance in their development through the exploration and thinking skills, right? It's quite interesting what's out there. Just a brief pause. I don't need to read these, but when you look at these statements, this is from the Foundation of Play. It's through UNICEF. So just take a look at these bullets here. Do you have any connections? Do you see, is there anything here that resonates in particular with the idea about play and children? So in fact, play is considered so essential to healthy development that even the United Nations recognizes as a specific right for all children. UNICEF here, in this article, recognizes the impact play can have on social emotional learning. It's why I bring play and games into the regular class, into the day, the literacy block and the numeracy block, versus just making it as a club after school or throughout the day. Or throughout, recess and so on. I'm just looking at the chat as well here. So this was just a bit of an example, and I give this because Minecraft is something that we often have seen our students play. We use that word play, and sometimes I wonder, is there a different word? I don't know. But here's an example of Minecraft, a lesson that I did. It was a self-driven inquiry where the students didn't necessarily use Minecraft to construct or recreate the Berlin Wall, for example, but more use the whole ability to have those supplies and those tools at their fingertips to connect to the symbols and the metaphors found in history, right? Taking it to the next level of thinking. So the Minecraft platform, that play, allowed them to work collaboratively, build on other students' work, use their leadership skills, negotiate, resolve conflicts, reflect, all those kinds of things. And yet when the kids left for school, from school to home that day, they were, Mom, Dad, that's what all I did today was play games, and I get the email or I get the call and saying, I don't want my kids playing games all day. And so we know that, yet, even though we know there's strong evidence and that supports games and play as a learning pedagogy itself, it's sometimes we as an education are hesitant to employ the practice, just based on how it looks, based on an honest lack of knowledge. And sometimes we as educators don't have those ideas in the back of our mind to be able to say, well, research says, because we are bombarded with many other kinds of research, pedagogies, other things that we have that are on our minds. And it's probably why we can easily connect game-based and play to these other pedagogical approaches that are quite familiar to all of us. that's fine. And that's what we want to do throughout this, even this whole presentation and next week and the week after, is that play is embedded in all of the other things we do. It's, yeah, I put a little quote here that says, when we played Minecraft, you'll know that what they actually did, they delved into deep literature, collaborative, created, problem solved, and shared, and they had fun. It wasn't that they were just playing all day. And again, how do we, conquer that myth, or about play and pedagogy? Does anybody want to share? Or Katina, you have your hand, I think you have your hand up.
That was from before, but just
Sorry.
hearing what you said. No, that's okay. So hearing what you said, I would just revise my initial definition to include the phrase that, play is fun. It can be learning. So it is something that if it's fun and learning, it doesn't seem like work. Maybe that's the better way for me to phrase it.
And you can see that it's complex, but yet but it's simple at the same time, right? And we also, in education, but I would say that we see these words not just in education anymore, but in other aspects of our life, but those words, game-based or gamification, we get more complex as we look at those two, because those two really are about your own personal, you can almost thinking of it as, your philosophy of education, what kind of teacher you are, what you believe in, what your values are. And for a long time, for me, I was very, sort of dead set against the idea of gamification. But I did really strongly believe in game-based learning, and would always correct people and say, no, I'm not gamifying, I'm game-based, thinking that everybody understood what I was talking about. And I think that's more clear now, but there are two different thoughts and ideas about both. And in fact, even though at one point I was very, I would say, closed-minded about it, I've opened my mind and started using both strategies in the classroom. I think it's worthwhile. I'm just looking and seeing if there's any more comments. University of Waterloo, they define both those, and they use them within their own programs. So gamification being integration of gaming elements, point system, leaderboards, badges, that kind of thing. Whereas game-based learning involves more designing your learning activities throughout using game characteristics or principles within that activity. So yeah, I'm curious, which one speaks to you, and do you have are you dead set against one or the other, or is it just you combine both of them into the things you do? And, when I think about gamifying our life, and I think these pictures are so small, I'm not sure if you can even kind of see what's in there. But I did start using gamified approaches in my own life and realized, if this is something that's impacting me and the things that I do, I wonder how this could impact my students, especially when it came to social emotional learning. So for example, I do use an app called Dailyo, DAILIO, and all of this, again, I have for you at the end. I will just give you the link. But that app is sort of gives me points or gives me encouragement and so on throughout my days, but it also tracks my mood. It tracks how I'm feeling. It tracks when I've started using this after an anxiety attack I had a couple of years ago. And then there's other apps like Strava. Dean, I saw you join Strava a little while ago, but I didn't see any action in there yet. But
yeah,
Strava.
I don't know if that's going to happen, because I was trying to link it. I got an Apple Watch and I was trying to hook it back to my Fitbit because I was doing that, and yeah. I got lost in that. So you'll have to follow me on my Apple Fitness.
I will, right? But even
this, I got now.
And you can see the community that builds. And Strava, it's took me a while to really get into it. But when I'm doing any kind of exercise, whether it's a slow walk or a run, a bike ride, whatever it is that I'm doing that's fit for my body, it gives me little badges and awards me and will tell me you did way better than you did last time. Or maybe it tells me, hey, you need some improvement. But these are things that, again, at one point in my life, no, I'm never going to use that. And now I'm finding that that's actually encouraging me. And I wonder how that would encourage other children, for instance, who may also, like me and like many of us adults, be struggling with anxiety or other things in our life. So I just wanted to throw those two out before we kind of got into this session and the next two as well. I think it's important to recognize, and here we have that games and play is from every culture, every economic background, every kinds of community. From the earliest time of civilization, play has been there, but yet we still find it hard to define. And yet one of the key characteristics of play is based on that word agency. And everywhere I turn, every bit of literature, every bit of research focuses on that word agency. And that children need to feel that sense of control that they don't always feel in the regular class when they're at school, right? We don't always feel that. So that's just a little bit of little bit on play. I'm going to share a little more, but I do want to look also on social emotional learning, because over the next 3 weeks, these are the two concepts that we're really focusing on both of those. So if you haven't, School Mental Health Ontario does have some really good information on SEL that focuses on culturally responsive strategies. So it is worth taking a look at it, but everyone has a very slightly different idea or concept of social emotional learning. And I think it's also, we struggle with that whole idea of culturally responsive, because we're in a time in education where we're doing a lot of relearning how we approach things, how we approach culture, how we approach things that we need to be very sensitive about. And I think social and emotional learning is a big part of that. We need to be careful. I'm not going to play the video that was on there. Whoops. Any thoughts right now? Questions? Okay. So what we know is social and emotional skills have been shown to have a positive impact on academic achievement. We know this, the research shows this. They're foundational skills, which kind of, it's nice to see that they're considered foundational skills, because we need to get to those skills before we can really get into some of the academics, which is, we tend to think that's our job as educators. There is strong evidence that developing social emotional learning skills at school contributes to well-being, right? Physical wellness, mental wellness, and that learning about mental health can help reduce that stigma around problems. So these are things that I think, and I will share the link as well as a small summary of each of these articles that I've dug into here. So as students gain these skills, and I'm going to keep mentioning, so like one of the familiar words I've mentioned already is that word agency, but I think another word is going to be that transferable skills and application. So as they develop these skills, they gain these transferable skills to other places. So again, it's not that they're just playing, but they're using skills that they're transferring into the game that they already have. And I'd say, Katina, we've seen a lot of that in some of the games in Minecraft with girls who game, and we're like, how are they doing this? How do they know this? And I think it's that they're actually they're applying what they know. They're using that as the context to apply, whereas that's the tough one in education. We have knowledge, we have communication, we have thinking, when we look at the assessment chart, but often that application part is the part where we truly want to see if students learn it, and games can help us do that. So throughout the curriculum in Ontario especially, we can see that academic skills are there, but we are there to learn social emotional learning. It emphasizes social emotional learning in all areas of the curriculum, but there is a new section in there for those of you who don't know that specifically builds on the learning skills. It's the health and phys ed, but it is specifically about social emotional learning skills. So since I'm talking about SEL, which focuses on the ability to manage emotions, I'd argue a first step would be to identify our feelings and our emotions with our students. I did this actually today, this little activity. And, it was really, it wasn't anything stressful, or, you didn't have to look and really come up with, get really in reflective mode, because we were also there to have fun. But I did give this chart. This is the Wilcox wheel to the students. Great tool. If you have, I would imagine most people have seen it, but if not, I do have a link for it. And then I would have the students, we looked at this game, DSIT, which I am going to go into detail next week. It's a game that has proven extremely successful with, looking at divergent thinking skills and teaching how to think in a creative way, which is really tricky, or teach abstract thinking. But it also, so that's the one area. Remember what I said, there was two sort of areas of thinking about game-based learning, right? That there's those academic, but the social emotional is big here. And if you look at these pictures, these are just 4 random pictures, and I got permission from the game people here to post these. But if you look at these pictures, I would say, okay, can you use a word to describe one of them that may not be an explicitly obvious word? So for example, I'll just do it just as a matter of time. I'm going to give you all a word, and I'm going to say politics. Anybody here guess which card I'm referring to? Go ahead and just say it. A couple of people said 1, right? I'm just looking on the, yeah, I guess that was Angela said that. So, and so that, again, that there's sort of more of the, I would say, thinking skills, abstract thinking, getting kids, people to think in a more divergent way when they're looking at things, like we're making connections, using symbols, metaphors, and so on. But then, you can take it to a different level and say, can anyone attach a feeling word to any of these cards? Or maybe even if you were to look at 4 of these cards, I have lots, but these 4 particular, is there any that resonates with you particularly today or this week, that kind of thing? And so, I would say, for me, to this week, and it's interesting when you really dig deep into the cards, because you're thinking, what does that mean? Like, what's that, like the genie, what are they doing there? And what's that kid, are they sleeping? And you start thinking about questions and so on. Does anyone have a word that they want to attach to one of these cards? So we'll talk about DSET more next week. This is a resource that everyone really should have. It's available freely online, Rethinking Learning. It was published in 2020, so very recent, by the Gandhi Institute for Education. And the whole resource focuses on social emotional learning and systems thinking. And they believe that SEL is key to building resiliency in individuals. And the research they show is in line with emergency literature from neurosciences, encouraging sort of that whole brain learning approach. So I will give you again the link to this. What I love about this resource, the foreword of it is from a Buddhist monk named Matthew Ricard, and he reminds us just we need to be creative in helping young people face the challenge of the world today. And I think that he really just from his heart talks about how it's why precisely where emotional intelligence and social skills are the best assets that we all have, right? More than, being really good at computer programming or at, at being able to design things or whatever, but really that thing that we have, that emotional intelligence is going to be that thing that's going to help us navigate the changes that we're seeing in the world. He says theoretical knowledge and artificial intelligence can't necessarily show us how to be good-hearted human beings. So it was a really fabulous introduction. They also bring about this look at the science behind social emotional learning and how the brain is more plastic then it's amenable to change right up to the age of 24, which there's a lot there. And then they talk a lot about sort of environment and the things that we bring to students in their environment and why that is so important, that in early childhood and adolescence, that the brain development, cognitive, social, and emotional development are dynamic and not linear, just like other kinds of learning, right? You're not just going to go from one stage to the next and next, and you're going, okay, I'm done. Let's check mark that off. So because of that, they really emphasize the need for enriched learning environments, and enriched social interactions, things like gameplay, right? So this is actually a picture of my classroom. Unfortunately, it's not like that anymore since the pandemic, but this was my classroom a few years ago. And what I like about this sort of image is that in all contexts, everyone is engaged, but they're all different ages, different abilities, different interests, and they're engaged based on the game. We have a Magic the Gathering tournament going on in one picture, and just you can see maybe it's a parent and a child, I can't remember, playing a game in another. Oh, we did have some. So number 2 was lonely. I agree with that one. That is lonely. And then so there are tons of frameworks. In fact, apparently there are in 2017, a study identified there's 136 different frameworks for social emotional learning. And so I'm just wanted to touch on a couple and that show you how those are the frameworks that I tend to use or refer to when I'm using some of the games in the classroom. So of course, this one is very popular. Most people know it. It's familiar. It's CASTLE. They define social and emotional learning as an integral part of education and just human development, period, not just in education. They've updated their site. Most of people have since 2020 because we've all changed how we've done things, and it's definitely worth looking into and just seeing the amazing amount of resources that they have. So they call this one the castle wheel, right? So there's all these 127 frameworks have different visuals and such, but this one in particular is called it has five core competencies that can be related pretty much to most of the gameplay that we do. And then the other one, I don't know how many use it or have heard of it, is MC squared, which really spoke to me when I learned about it. It seeks to provide explicit training in 4 competencies. So as you can see, they're listed in that picture there. But it focuses a lot on the idea of dissonance and to use those competencies to help with regulation of our emotions. So we often hear about them. This is often what I'm dealing with in the class with the particular demographic of students I work with. So the recent research from neurosciences shows the emotional centers of the brain are intertwined with cognitive centers, right? That emotional, and if those emotions are going crazy and it's reacting or causing us to react in certain ways, we are not going to get down to that learning that we want our kids to do. So it's sort of that, if dissonance is that unpleasant emotive state. So that's what this EMC squared really focuses about, that emotional regulation, which I believe a lot of the games that we do play, we can tackle. So I'm just going to zip through the next couple of slides because I have all of this in a handout that I'm going to give you, but these are just to show you how there's so many good free resources out there. Pear Deck, for instance, is a really good one on that if you don't use Pear Deck, play with it, dabble. Maybe most of you did last year when we were online, but it particularly, it connects directly to PowerPoint and it has templates that you can do check-ins with students throughout your lessons, which is pretty sweet. So there was one in particular, I like the stress check, and you can use Pear Deck and their interactive features. Pretty easy, has lots of videos and so on that help us with learning all of these things. The emotional wheel app, very similar to the one I showed you earlier. There's Nearpod, template galore. A lot of them for the social mode, the SEL are free. Brain Pop, tons of free social emotional learning stuff as well. So there's so many out there. So now putting it together, we looked a little bit about game-based, and we're looking a little and social emotional learning. And so once we know that connection, it's easy to go through and answer these questions. I don't want my kids playing games all day when they come home. And then you would, of course, answer yes, you do want them to play games, and this is why, right? You can share why you want them. With that said, though, there is some current, research and, people out there sharing what some of the challenges and the barriers are of implementing game-based into the classroom. University of Toronto, for example, this is from them. They also, just like University of Waterloo, have integrated some of these pedagogies into their environments. But they also, their research says that many people feel that games may take too long. It's easier just to tell, to do your lecture. The time is an issue, perhaps materials, perhaps pedagogical knowledge. So they talk a lot about those things that maybe are real to all of us. And then there was this great article I found in the Journal of Play. And so the authors, Feng and Cheng, this is about 2012, they focused their research on the portrayals of play-based learning and misalignments. This was a really good article on sort of, again, that dichotomy between play-based learning and the misalignment between what the science says and how we feel about it, in a sense. And their research, they highlight the barriers that impede the ability of teachers to implement the play-based learning. But it's things that I think probably anyone who has tried to do some more innovative or different strategies in the classroom have probably experienced. Like you might get pressure from the next grade saying, you're not teaching them, or you're not preparing them for the grade coming up, or, preparing them for high school, or preparing them for their university courses when we're just using that kind of pedagogy. That was apparently a big one. And it does also implicitly suggest this dichotomous stakeholder perception that they say. Also, they in their research, they acknowledge that some of the stakeholders, like parents and teachers in upper grades, don't feel that games is adequately preparing these students for, like what they need, right? It's that they want explicit instruction, and game-based learning does not come across as being explicit instruction. Any questions, thoughts before I just talk? So they also, and I think this is a real barrier for some of us, and it was about the ratios between student and teacher, and how can you implement this kind of pedagogy when you have 35 students in your classroom. And so that was a big part of their conversation as well. And yet all these are valid. They do not necessarily align with research. And even in their particular research, they mentioned that even in the same school or the same community, the same school board, they had some teachers who were successfully integrating game-based learning, whereas other teachers were continually struggling. And so those barriers, while they existed, some were still doing it very successfully. But who knows? This is another project that came out of Harvard, also talking about sort of this paradox of play and school, and that, we can find meaningful learning opportunities, that it will advance academic skills. This is out of the Faculty of Education there, and they have a project, they had research coming from something called Project Zero that focused specifically around game-based learning and play. So I want to, the last little bit, we're going to look at a few of my influencers and look at what some of the things they say about game-based learning. And I think in fact, this one, Matthew Farber, you see on here, is a book I'm going to share in a moment, really just reminds us that it's even though we might be passionate about this strategy, including myself, sometimes we do need to take a step back and realize that it is not for everyone. You know, I had a student the other day, just desperately talking to me, like disclosed she was in another teacher's classroom, but she's like, oh, can you talk to her and tell her to stop playing so many games in the classroom, because I just want worksheets. Like, worksheets? Like, what do you mean you want worksheets? Who wants worksheets? But this kid really wanted worksheets, and it was what spoke to that kid, and what that kid needed was worksheets, and it what calmed that kid's brain a little. And so we had to find a way to integrate worksheets throughout the gameplay as well. So I think we need to just remember that it's not that we still need to recognize what our kids need. Love this particular quote. It is in the context of play that children test out that new knowledge. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about that application of learning, that they can transfer their learning, that kind of thing. So just a very quick recap before we kind of finish the last part of this presentation is that there is evidence in science that notes game-based learning is connected well with social emotional. That while learning through play is universal, what it looks like might depend on culture, and we will attack that throughout the next couple of sessions over the next couple of weeks. The benefits of play are recognized by research and science, and do lead to greater emotional and academic success. However, we still do see this dichotomy or this uncertainty about how we feel about play in a classroom. I'm just giving a moment for people to read the slide. Are there anybody that wants to peep in or talk or share? So what's interesting here is we talked about these pedagogical approaches that we're so familiar with, and we know through our own experience and our own education works so well. And so the Lego Foundation, this paper that I read called Learning Through Play in Schools, another great resource, very, very, well done, and their ability to connect to they talked about these principles or pedagogical approaches that are evidenced in game-based learning. And this is also the organization that connects with MIT and the whole use of Scratch. So they believe it's the pedagogical approaches with game-based learning are completely connected to collaboration, cooperative learning, experiential learning, guided discovery, inquiry-based. These are all words that are familiar with us. So as soon as we can kind of come to terms with that play-based learning can actually encompass it all, I think we'll all be using it a lot more in the classroom. And then we do have theories that we are all familiar with, like behaviorism, which would mostly connect, I think, to that gamification, right? So it's more that tech-driven. We see a lot more behaviorism, constructivism, that child-centered approach. Many of us know these words already, but how does that relate? I think the more we know how these theories can relate to game-based learning, the more that we are going to confidently use them in the classroom. And then there was the cultural history theory, which finally, with that theory, it's a pedagogy of play that is joint amongst educators and students. So it sort of alternates between positions of guiding and following, and I think, and bringing in that content. And there's a lot of educators out there using that approach. I think constructivism as well. In fact, all of them. So, whoops. So the first step is Jane McGonigal. I'm wondering if there's anybody here who's seen or read this book already. So this one, Super Better. I saw her present this at a conference and was just mesmerized about what she had to say. It's a whole book she created that is gamified approach to wellness. So it actually changed my perception and opinion of gamification, where at the time I'm like, nope, absolutely not. Now it's like, okay, yes, I I can absolutely see how that can work. It worked on me, and apparently it worked on her as she wrote this book. She was also supporting her own wellness at the time. So she again brings up that word agency in the feeling of confidence, that action that you take, that you can have control over your own wellness, your own learning. So she considers the book part of a game, and in it she gives a whole, there's quests and allies and power-ups and epic wins. Those are some of the kind of words she uses in it, but it just definitely an easy read, definitely something I would recommend having if you don't already. It's not the kind of game that we're talking about when we're playing Minecraft, that sort of game. It's really game that we do within ourselves. But she does all sorts of games. It's her focus. I consider her a gaming guru. This one was, has anyone ever heard of Reality Broken? This was such a, if you haven't, you must. I'm sure you must. But it is, she did this project with, this is when I heard her speak at a conference, and she shared this project that she did with the New York Library. They were having their centennial celebration event. And so they did this project with her where they invited pre-qualified players to explore the building 70 miles of stacks, and they used laptops and smartphones, and they had all these different kind of clues. And apparently it was all night, like they opened it up at night, and they did this game all night long where, and at the end they made a book based on the clues and based on everything else. And it was something to do with the Declaration of Independence or something. But it was going back to some of the theories we talk about. It was definitely looking at that constructivist approach to learning, but she brought in that game in there. This one's for you, Katina, if you're out there. This was this quote that she had, and I just love it. And it was, gaming is literally the opposite of depression. How can we bring the opposite of depression into our everyday life? And so that's sort of her big thing about gaming.
I love that.
Isn't it great? I do. I love it as well. And she does talk about that more than 500 million people out there are playing games. So her focus is always, how can you play games to feel better? It's not always put your game away and get to work, or stop playing. For her, it's, why don't you get on the game? That's going to help you, and so on. So she just noted that it activates and brings many emotions and feelings and excitement and curiosity and all of those kinds of things that sometimes we don't, see in other ways. So just absolutely amazing. And she calls it the gameful mindset. Another person, I just want to be very cognizant of time. So I could keep talking about Jane McGonigal, but definitely look into the book. And this book right here, Gaming SEL by Matthew Farber, is brand new. I just got it, and it is amazing. He was a teacher. I think that's what really got me as well, that eventually went and did his PhD and became an academic and wrote this book during the pandemic. And so a lot of his references are about the pandemic and how we were learning through the pandemic and so on. So in the book, he really references and he investigates the opportunities games have in supporting social emotional skills, particularly exactly what, I was like, whoa, I don't even need to do this presentation. Just read this book. He brings in experts from fields of education, game developers. He talks about he interviews people from Castle. He talks about the Ted Rogers Center, and his whole beginning of the book is about Fred, not Ted, Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. And sort of talks a little bit about him and how he was way ahead of his time when looking at social emotional learning. He talks about Minecraft, of course, just so much to look at. But again, yes, this was that he begins the book talking about Mr. Rogers, I did not know this, but apparently he is known as the father of SEL. He was able to do this thing, I don't know how many of you know, called the fourth wall. And so, and that he did this before you see it now on television or in games, where I guess the person behind the screen is sort of speaking to the audience. They feel like they're being spoken to. And that was what it's sort of that invisible line separating that for the performer and the audience. And that was what he was known for. So I see that in like shows like, I don't know, like Dora the Explorer was an example they used in the book, but I mean, I'm thinking something like The Office. If you guys watch that fourth wall. He again says, when children feel a sense of agency, they are in control and they drive the experience. And that sense of agency was brought up earlier in this presentation when we talked about resources or the research. And when they feel agency and they have a handle on their own emotions, the learning can be just absolutely incredible. Matthew Farber does also mention this whole idea of good games opposed to candy coded multiple choice kind of games. I'm quoting him, and I don't know fully if there are good games or bad games. I think it depends on how you use it, because I use some of those games as well, and my students love them, the multiple choice quiz kind of games. But I think it's how we frame the game, how we introduce it, how we use it within the classroom in there. But I'm not sure, you know, it really is that it's how we all play games for different reasons, right? It might be to relax. We don't always have to play a game to learn. It doesn't have to be a goal. Here's our learning goals for today. It may be for relaxing. It may be when stressed. It may be when bored, or, you know, just listening to music and that sort of thing. And lastly, before I finalize the end of this presentation, I did want to bring a mention to Jackie Gerstein and her website as well, because she is one of those teachers, I think, at the beginning of this session, for constantly sharing her resources. And she shares so many games and ideas and has such a strong philosophy about her approach using game-based learning that it's worth looking at. And she is a practicing teacher that's also an academic and has gone in and out of academia and has written books and so on, but has a strong belief towards play-based learning. Here's just some screenshots of her blog. She does Never Have I Ever, where she puts all of these things in links to the work that she's done with her students. Sumoku, a different kind of Sudoku, one called the Equate game, Trifacta. These are all games I'll share a little bit next week as well, but it's all in her blog. I love this one. This is Scrabble Relay. Like, how cool is that? Is putting, you know, so it's, I guess she's brought it into her phys ed activity, but having kids in teams create words, right? Absolutely amazing. And so and this was like like one of those really awesome finds, because you can buy this book, but if you go to this link, it's free, and it's just 100 games to use in the classroom. Some of them are online, some of them are like physical games, but I'll share this in my resource I'm going to share with you momentarily. And that's it. I think I just wanted to end with that when we start next week and I dig into some of the games I've shared, I am going to really be reminding people about any kind of game I ever do in the class is universally designed. It's games, it doesn't matter what your age is, you know, what your ability, that you should be able to get the most out of that. That's that, you know, you're seeking something and you can get that no matter what. And we'll give some examples to that. So next week, games and lessons, I'm going to do DSIT. I'm going to do one called that I did last year. I think Sarah might have done this, I think, but Storytime Battles, I had a game that we kind of created. Some math games, mapping and geography games. So we're going to share all of that next week. And then the week after, in part 3, we will go through Minecraft and including Katina. I'll hopefully talk a little bit about Minecraft and esports because it's fascinating. So I will bring that up as well. And I think that's pretty new to all of that. So here's the link. This is the sort of for you. I will put that in the chat right now. And then I think there might be a door prize or something of that sort. Is that correct? Chat. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There is a door prize.
So here, I think if you guys want to try, this is like literally a handout. I feel so old school, but instead of just giving you, the slides are in there too, but if for some of you who just want to kind of have it in a handout format, it should be a link to pretty much everything that I've said and all of the research associated with that as well. Go to the next slide here. There is this here. And I think that it says if Katina, it's Dean or Katina, is that you? Or do we wait for that?
Yeah, no, that is, I'm on my phone right now. So if you just bear with me.
Cool. Is there any, how's, in terms of the session, it is 8 o'clock. I cannot believe timing. I kind of timed that well. I actually practiced it one time through, so I'm happy with timing. But I do hope to see some of you there for the games that we're going to do next week. Do you have if anybody has any questions or anything they want to add in the chat, I'd love to hear. Hopefully you found this informative as I found when I was doing it, but that just may also be that this is part of my passion. But yeah, I would love if you have any feedback, shoot me a question, but I'm just going here to check the messages. Thanks for coming, everyone. Oh, we're just. This is what I was getting to. There is a session survey. The handout I gave you has a link for the session survey as well, which is really helpful if you guys don't mind to do that.
Links to all the sessions, but if not, please check the here. I'll give you the link to the website that you can double check, and you can register a second time if that's not going to hurt anything. Let me just
recording in progress.
Yeah, if you need to go there, Amy, and register, you can. So let me share my screen. So you need to end your sharing, Zoe, and then I can start mine.
All right.
And I will spin the wheel of names, and you will be entered into amazing. Where's my? This is it. Here's the wheel of names. Okay, we're gonna spin it. Look, we have 5 people in here, and 2 people are named Amy and 2 are named Sarah. How's that? All right. It's Amy, and Amy was I correct in seeing that you're from Connecticut? Oh, she left.
Oh,
she left.
She was just there like minutes ago.
Oh my. Okay, well, I'll spin again then. I'll spin again. Okay. Oh, I'm not sharing. I'm not sharing.
Oh no.
Let's see who wins. Sarah with an H. So Sarah, if you would just drop your email into the chat, Katina is she's the person that makes this all happen. She will connect with you, and make sure you get a nice little prize.
Yay,
so Sarah. Oh, well, look at that! Look how good. Like Katina's like Oprah. She just gives and you get a prize, and you get a prize, and you get a prize.
Oh, there we go. Look at that, you people. This is wonderful.
She just needs your email addresses, and if you would post them in the chat, we've got Sarah.
And I absolutely can't wait for next week as well. And I will give you links and resources to everything as well. So thanks for coming, guys. And yeah, see you next week.
Invite a colleague for next week too. Wouldn't that be nice?
Why not? It's free for you guys. So I guess I'll stop the recording now.
Yes, please.
So